Shabbat Shalom. Our focus today is on Yitzhak. Toledot means generations or descendants. This parsha begins with a mystery. Why do we call this parsha Toledot? A few weeks ago we read Parshat Noach. It was about the generations of Noach. So why not call this parsha Yitzhak, as we're focusing on his descendants? But it's not simply a recitation of Yitzhak's descendants. It makes a connection between the first 3 generations of our people. What do we know about Yitzhak? It's the old adage, like father, like son. Is that applicable to Avraham and Yitzhak? Should we talk about the similarities between them, or perhaps ask in what way does Yitzhak differ from Avraham? As we begin, let's look first at this week's account of his sojourn with the Philistines. Now, the first thing we discovered is that he acts amazingly like his father in one regard. He identifies Rivka as his sister out of fear. In his case, this is a total lie because Rivka is not his sister. She is his cousin. The story didn't work. Again, in both cases, God had told them to leave Canaan because of a famine. But obviously, rather than having faith in Hashem, believing that he would protect them, even when they were outside the land of promise, they took matters into their own hands. God is clearly the one who directs both of them to go to a pagan and unknown land, and yet both are fearful for their lives. And this is because neither of them fully comprehends what it means to trust God. The question is, do we, when it comes to protection and safety? And as we all know, fear may cause any of us to act in a foolish and even regrettable way. Both father and son demonstrate fear of the powers that be, pagan powers, governed by Hasatan, instead of relying upon Hashem. Each believes that the beauty of his wife is enough to put him in danger. Although in this instance we can see remarkable similarities between Avraham and his son, there are 3 distinct differences, significant differences, in regard to their response to fear. And these actually shed some light on the unique and the very dissimilar personalities of Avraham and Yitzhak. The first distinction is in the relationship between Avraham and Sarah, expressed in the clear communication between them. Avraham tells Sarah that she is a beautiful woman and expresses his concern for his own safety on the basis of her beauty. And then he shares with her his plan for their mutual survival, requesting her cooperation. With Yitzhak, there's a total absence of real communication with Rivka, as we see in other situations. Yitzhak says nothing to her about his fears or concerns. In fact, the first she hears of this plan for survival is when the Philistines greet them, giving her no advance notice, no warning at all. Yitzhak's plan must have come as a terrible shock to Rivka, much like some of the storylines in comedies where the second person is expected to go along with the gag without actually being told what it is. A second distinction is that Avraham actually considered and created a plan of action to deal with a perceived dilemma. He communicated the plan to Sarah, and he discussed it with her before they even entered the foreign land. Yitzhak doesn't have a plan. Perhaps at the moment when fear grips him, his first thought is, what do I do now? It isn't until he's actually entered the land and is struck by a sense of panic and dread that he confronts his fear. The third distinction between Avraham and Yitzhak is in how the two men proceed prior to being found out. Because of the plan Avraham had made with Sarah, Pharaoh took her into his palace, and by God's intervention, a plague kept him from seeking to have a sexual relationship with Sarah. But Yitzhak stayed with Rivka to protect her? We don't know. But his plan was uncovered when Yitzhak shows that he doesn't even have the self-control to keep his hands off his wife, even in this dire situation. Avimelech found him out because he was fondling his wife. Only then did the truth about their relationship come out. Both Avraham and Yitzhak gave in to their fears, but each responded in a different way. Yitzhak was a reactionary. He made no plan. He reacted when the situation made him afraid. He failed to communicate his feelings or concerns to his wife. He did not give her advance notice of his intentions. He didn't discuss the situation with her. And he was found out because of his lack of self-control. From what we can see of these examples, Yitzhak had not learned good communication skills, and he was unable to develop them within his own family. Is it any surprise that Yitzhak and Rivka later have favorites among their sons, and that only Rivka seems to seek to follow God's agenda? And communication with God is at issue here. At the beginning of this week's Parsha, we read that Yitzhak and Rivka were unable to have children. Why were Avraham and Sarah, Yitzhak and Rivka, and later Rachel and Yaakov seemingly incapable of having children? In the world of that day, and honestly, up into the 20th century, children were the only assurance of prosperity, protection, and continuity for any family or community. And if a couple didn't have children, well, it was always the woman's fault. It was common practice, in fact, to replace a wife who didn't bear children as expected, such as Henry VIII, for example. In Jewish circles, it was not unusual for a man to divorce one wife and marry another if the first was childless. What was God allowing each couple to learn through the challenge of infertility? Was this just one of those things? As it says in Mishlei and also in Matthew, the rain falls on the just and the unjust? Or was this grave concern central to the future of God's chosen people, calculated by God to encourage a specific attitude or action? What principles can we, in this instance, learn from Yitzhak and Rivka? What did God seek to teach Rivka and Yitzhak? And why did he show them, or why did he allow them to be childless when having a child was an absolute necessity for his plans? The Talmud answers by saying, because the Holy One longs to hear the prayer of the righteous. God yearns to hear our prayers because prayer creates an intimate bond between ourselves and our Creator. Through prayer, we become more aware of the manifest presence of God, more able to see His work in our lives. Through prayer, we become more attuned to the work of God in the world, in the lives of others, and in the events taking place. In the midst of our often too busy lives, it's easy to forget God, to put Him to one side, to give Him only a tiny space in our time and thought, although we may formally acknowledge Him as the source of all good things. Well, the infertility of our ancestors should teach us to trust and depend upon God for the big issues in life, as well as for the small ones. Although Yitzhak may not have been the world's best communicator, he and Rivka clearly exemplify true faith in God when it comes to prayer. They bear witness to the truth that nothing in life can rob us of God's blessings because He has promised to be faithful. Pardon me. In Bereshit 25:21, Yitzhak demonstrates key aspects of effective prayer. The first key is persistence in prayer. The Hebrew verb here is ve'yeter, translated as entreated, not defined anywhere as praying, but denoting instead urging. Rashi explains this word, entreated, as he importuned much through prayer. Yitzhak was both determined and persistent in his prayers. Rav Yeshua underscores the importance of persistence when he said, "Keep on asking, and you will receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking, and you will find. Keep on knocking, and the door will be open to you." The second key is fervency in prayer. This can also be inferred from the same verb, which is translated he entreated. Here Rashi comments that Yitzhak did not pray half-heartedly. He persistently and fervently beseeched God to remove Rivka's barrenness. To be effective in prayer, we must pray with passion and kavanah, intention. As Rav Yaakov teaches, the effective, fervent prayer of a righteous person avails much. We should pray as if our lives depend on it, because they do. In reality, life does depend upon our relationship with God. The third key is particularization in prayer. In other words, our petitions should be as specific as possible. Yitzhak and Rivka had a very precise need for children. They prayed, not like some of us, God bless us and supply all of our needs, but very specifically. It's not enough to ask God to bless us, our family, our community. We must pray clearly and specifically for our prayers to be effective. Another thought here is that how do we know our prayers are answered unless they're specific? So here we see that although Yitzhak did not necessarily excel as a great communicator, he certainly knew how to communicate with God. God heard the prayers of Yitzhak and Rivka, and he blessed them with not one, but 2 children, twins. However, perhaps this might have been a case where less was truly more. So perhaps they should have prayed for a son rather than that Rivka would be fertile. As we know, only one son would inherit the covenant, would walk with God, and would be the line through which God would continue to create our nation. And that son, of course, was Yaakov. Several events between Lech Lecha and Toledot may help us to better understand Yitzhak's character and communication skills. Personally, I don't see Yitzhak as having the outstanding leadership abilities or faith of either Avraham or Yaakov, except perhaps in the one instance of praying for Rivka to be fertile. In some ways, I've always seen him as something of a placeholder, standing between 2 great men with whom God dealt extensively. His wife displays strength of character, in some ways positive, in some ways negative, while he seems to rely on feelings and desires. His emotions often get the better of him. His faith, other than as described previously, is expressed by only one action. When his enemies filled up his wells, he redug them over and over again, demonstrating the quality of perseverance. In Parashat Vayera, Yitzhak's own life is put on the line for the purpose of testing his father and mother and himself. Yitzhak was not a child when this occurred. He was a young man. Yet his father communicated nothing of what God had said to him or what he intended to do. Well, perhaps because he didn't really know. Only when Yitzhak asked his father about the animal for the sacrifice did Avraham explain anything about their journey. And then his answer is cryptic at best. But again, perhaps he communicated all that he himself comprehended. And in this setting, Yitzhak is seen almost as incidental or peripheral to the great challenge of Avraham's faith in God. In Parashat Sarah, having only just laid eyes on Rivka, we're told that Yitzhak took her into his tent and made love to her. The text actually indicates that this gave him comfort for the loss of his mother. Perhaps his mother was the one who communicated more with him than his father. Yitzhak did not spend time with Rivka, getting to know her, this very young girl who had left everything to be his wife. He did not gently encourage her to get to know him or to care for him before moving on to a sexual relationship with her. And there was no communication. It seems only at the point where they could have expected to have children and didn't, that communication between them finally joined them in praying for a solution. At no other time, it seems, did they communicate about any other issue or concern. And this became the family dynamic. Poor communications, coupled with lack of confidence, leads to dishonesty. We find the ultimate example in Toledot's narrative climax. Here, Yaakov, no doubt assured by his mother that he is the son of the promise, the son of the covenant, seeks to receive the birthright and the blessing. The birthright, really, he's already gotten. But he uses a scheme that is, in fact, a sort of extension of my wife is really my sister by identifying himself as his own brother. Should we be surprised that the woman who was passed off as her husband's sister should think it not inappropriate to pass her younger son off as his older brother? Did she communicate to Yitzhak God's message concerning Yaakov becoming the inheritor of the covenant? Did he take this message to heart? Did they ever speak together about the future of their sons? Yitzhak had his favorite. He loved Esau because he was a man's man and could provide Yitzhak with the delicious food he craved. There again, his physical appetite ruled him. Rivka had the promise of God, but would God keep his promise? Perhaps she imagined, as Sarah had before her, that she would be doing God's work by coming up with her own plan of action. Yitzhak and Rivka were two parents working against one another rather than together, as is so often the case today. Esau and Yaakov, two sons observing little communication between their parents and no real interaction in planning for the future. Is it any wonder that God's plan for Yaakov involved separation from his parents and his brother and travel to a distant land where he had only God to depend on? We're told in Ketuvim Mishakim that everything written in Torah is for our admonition, that is, exhortation, guidance, and reproof. Through what is written, we are to be educated in righteousness and righteous action. We are to be warned of the consequences of wrong actions, and we are to be cautioned before making the mistakes of those who've gone before us. Thus, when we see the mistakes made by Yitzhak and Rivka, their lack of communication with one another, their lack of unity in raising their sons, we can learn from them and act differently. Their failure can pave the way for our success. But the history of the life and experience of each person mentioned in the scriptures is also to be an example for us. Yitzhak's commitment to prayer is a model for us. He was persistent in prayer. He was fervent in prayer. and he was specific and definite in prayer. We can see his success in prayer and use his prayer as a pattern, a paradigm for our own prayers. We imitate Yitzhak when we pray in this way. When we look at the lives of those around us who know and walk with God, we so often are quick to notice their flaws and their failures. It is so easy to find fault. But rather than becoming critical, we should learn from their errors and mistakes rather than thinking ourselves superior. When we observe righteousness and success, instead of trying to find a tiny flaw or fault, we should seek to emulate what is good and righteous. We emulate those whom we admire, those who exert influence over us. Admiration of this kind should lead to adulation and then imitation. This happens in the commercial industry as one company copies the best-selling products of another, and in the entertainment industry with music and performances. There's always a place for imitators. For years, the Japanese were known as those who imitated what was best in the world market in areas like photography, until they became so good that others began to imitate them. Good imitators will be admired, but those that miss the mark, well, they are soon forgotten. And so it is with those who are Talmidim of Mashiach. God is not seeking substitutes or fakes. He's looking for what is real. Here are God's words to us on this subject. Mishlei 22. Don't make friends with an angry man, or you will learn his ways and set a snare for your soul. 1 Corinthians 16. Don't be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Tehillim 119. I am a companion of all who fear you and of those who keep your precepts. If we desire to follow the ways of righteousness as good Talmidim of Rav Yeshua, we need to become those who influence the world and not those who are influenced by the world. We must carefully choose those we imitate based on Torah values, admiring what is godly, and turning away from and even opposing what is not. We must live in such a way that others will desire to emulate and imitate our lifestyle and behavior. Who are your heroes? Who do you want to emulate? Who do you follow? Rav Shaul declared to those in Corinth, be followers of me, even as I am of Mashiach. Our objective is to be conformed to the image of Mashiach Yeshua. We follow the positive examples of those who have gone before us. Our goal, to become the men and women God created us to be. Shavua Tov.